As a historical superpower and center of civilization and culture, France is something that speaks to all of our imaginations. Fashion, romance and the Eiffel Tower are all iconic parts of this Western European state. But as a big fan of history, I think the best way to understand something is to look at its past, and that's exactly what we're going to do. I know France, along with most countries, has way too long of a history to put in one video, but I'll try to summarize it as best as I can. In the year 600 BC, Greeks from modern-day Turkey founded the colony of Massalia, which is now the city of Marseille, on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. Around the same time, Celtic tribes from Central Europe that would later be known as Gauls started slowly inhabiting the modern-day territory of France, moving further southwest in the centuries following, creating settlements such as Lutetia, which would later become Paris. The Gauls would have many fights with Germanic tribes in the north, Aquitanians in the south, and eventually also the Romans. The Romans, like Romans do, would eventually conquer all of the Gaulish territories and displace Celtic populations to prevent local identities of forming a threat against the Roman authority. This is also around the time when cities like Lugdunum and Narbonensis were founded. This eventually made the former Gaulish territories, which we will be calling Gaul from now on, replace the Celtic languages with Vulgar Latin. Vulgar Latin, if you don't know, was a name for all forms of Latin spoken by the common people within the empire. In Gaul specifically, forms of Vulgar Latin with a lot of influences from the original Celtic languages started to slowly become dominant. This is when the Celtic culture was replaced by Gallo-Roman culture. Eventually Gaul became pretty well integrated into the empire, with two emperors, Claudius and Caracalla, actually coming from Gaul. But when in the year 260 Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persians, a lot of unrest started to spread across the empire. Gaul, plus modern-day Britain, and Iberia declared their independence as the Gallic Empire. This didn't last long though, and was eventually retaken by the Romans in 274, just 14 years later. Still, this could be seen as the first form of a French state, and this also opened the gates to immigration of the Franks. More about them in a bit. Later in the 4th century, a migration of Celts happened within the empire. Celtic people from Great Britain moved back to mainland Europe after centuries of living on the island. These would later become the Bretons. This is the reason why some people still speak the Celtic languages in the far west of France. Another century later, the Roman Empire slowly started to decline in power. Eventually, the province of Aquitania was given to the Germanic Goths as a reward for helping fight back the Germanic Vandals. Later, cooperation with tribes outside the empire also didn't help remain a stronghold on territory, when the Roman Empire asked the Huns to fight the Burgundians, who were basically pushed into the modern-day area of France, becoming quite dominant in the region. This also led to the Huns becoming stronger and eventually forming an even greater threat to the Roman Empire than the Burgundians did. When the Roman Empire was about to collapse at any moment, most of the territories outside the Italic core were abandoned. The north of Gaul was taken over by the Germanic Franks, the south by Visigoths, and also the Burgundians and many other Celtic tribes and Germanic tribes started to create small kingdoms in Gaul. In 486, Clovis I, a Frank, conquered the north of Gaul, which was one of the few areas still ruled by Roman authorities. This united most of modern-day Belgium and northern France under a Frankish ruler. When Clovis I would eventually adopt Christianity as his religion, his power among the Gallo-Romans people who were almost entirely Christian started to grow rapidly. This gave him enough power to eventually defeat the Visigoths and take over control of the southwest of modern-day France. But this kingdom only survived until his death in 511, when it fell apart into 4 kingdoms, spread over his 4 sons, who would later conquer Burgundy too. Keep in mind these kings didn't have much real power, but were mostly figureheads. In the centuries following, borders between these kingdoms would change a lot, even unifying a couple of times, but breaking up later again. Let's skip forward to the 8th century when Muslim invaders from North Africa conquered Iberia, and were getting a little bit too close to the Frankish kingdoms for their liking. Several wars in the south were fought, most notably at Toulouse in 721 and at Tours in 732. The latter fought by Charles Martel, earning him much respect and power within the Frankish kingdoms. In 751, his son Pepin the Short would establish the Carolingian dynasty as the ruler of Franks and unify the Frankish kingdoms for the coming decades. And you might have heard of Pepin the Short because he was the father of one of the most infamous rulers in European history, Charlemagne. Charlemagne again reunited the Frankish kingdoms plus Aquitaine and also conquered Lower Saxony and the Germanic Lombard lands in northern Italy and incorporated the lands of Bavaria into his kingdom officially. Besides all this, he also pushed the Muslim invaders back as far south as Barcelona and defeated the Avars, a mysterious nomadic tribe from the east. Because of this success and his support to the Catholic Church, he was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in the year 800, making the Frankish Empire the official successor to the Roman Empire, in the west at least. For a change, his son Louis actually managed to keep the empire united until his death. It was Louis' two sons, Charles the Bald and Louis the German, who split the empire into West and East Francia, with Middle Francia as a buffer state. This buffer state was mostly taken over by East Francia not too much later. In the years following, West Francia fell victim to Vikings, some of which settling in Normandy and becoming known as the Normans. Throughout the entire early Middle Ages from this point onwards, West Francia or France became very decentralized, with some areas such as Normandy, Flanders and Languedoc basically being fully autonomous states within the kingdom. In practice, the dukes and princes had much more power than the king, which especially became a problem when the Normans invaded England and William the Conqueror became king of England, all while still being a subject to the king of France. In 987, Hugh of Capet started the Capetian dynasty by being elected the new king, but his dynasty now still didn't have much power. In the decades following, France had lost a lot of its territory to the English and it seemed like the end was near, but when King Richard the Lionheart of England died in 1199, the French managed to take back a lot of the lands taken by the English. France slowly started to become more centralized as well, but local rulers still had a lot of power, and in many instances more than the king himself. It was only under King Louis IX that France would become a truly centralized kingdom. Things went okay for France in the years following, all while England still really wanted to take back the lost territories in the south and west of France. Tensions hit a peak in the 14th century when King Charles IV died, and because he had no children, logically, King Edward III of England would be his successor, making him king of both England and France. This was of course unacceptable, and the two countries started a 100 Years' War, which was more like multiple conflicts spanning over a period of 125 years. During this war, the French population suffered greatly, not only because of this conflict, but also because it coincidentally happened at the same time as the Black Death. The English seemed to be winning the war, but because of Joan of Arc, someone that probably doesn't need an introduction, the French managed to fight back the English and got back all of France with the exception of Calais and the Channel Islands. The 100 Years' War is sometimes seen as the beginning of French nationalism and France as being one of the political and military powers in Europe. After the war, France remained a feudal society, but regions weren't as autonomous as they used to be, and you could speak about a truly unified state of France for the first time. During the Ancien Regime, the period of French history between the 100 Years' War and the French Revolution, more about that in a bit, France was the second biggest country in Europe, only behind Russia and greatly ahead of England, Spain and the Habsburgs. France became a key conflict zone for the Protestant Reformation. John Calvin, along with the German Martin Luther, one of the most important Protestant reformists, was a Frenchman. As you probably already know, the Protestant Revolution didn't go too well in France, and many were persecuted and fled the country, mostly to the Protestant German states and later also the Dutch Republic. At the same time, the Holy Roman Empire, a collection of German states that for no good reason called itself that way, also struggled with Protestants. Many of the states had big populations converting to Protestantism, and this was against the will of Emperor Ferdinand II, who was for religious uniformity. Although the French crown was against Protestantism, they joined the war on their side because of national interest. This made Catholic forces from the Holy Roman Empire invade France. The war that this started between many European nations would be known as the 30 Years' War and became one of the deadliest wars in European history, resulting in 8 million deaths throughout widespread disease, famine and persecution. After the war, which resulted in freedom of religion in the Holy Roman Empire, France started getting interested in colonization, especially the Americas, where the French founded New France, which included the towns of Quebec City and Montreal. In 1643, King Louis XIV came to power, and after the death of his chief minister, he became the true totalitarian ruler of France, placing himself above everyone except for God. His main goal was to eliminate the last small remnants of feudalism and reign over France from Paris all by himself. He would later conquer the Franche-Comté and the Spanish Netherlands, now Belgium. A later peace treaty ended up with him almost completely giving back the lands he conquered. The city of Lille is the only major thing France gained. This peace was fragile though, and later a war broke out between France and the Dutch Republic after France had asked the newly formed Dutch Republic to go at war with Spain again, which they refused. The Dutch Republic was almost overrun, but because of purposely flooding the country to halt the French invaders and help from the English, the French weren't able to. The new peace treaty did give France control over a part of the Spanish Netherlands and Franche-Comté. King Louis XIV had also moved the royal court to the Palace of Versailles, where he invited nobility and gave them privileges for good behavior, some as crazy as being allowed to dress him up. All while King Louis XIV was trying to increase his power over the nobility and make his home the center of culture. A lot more wars were fought, and most of them led to nothing, greatly displeasing the French people. This partly led to the Age of Enlightenment. Montesquieu especially proposed the idea of separation of powers, or trias politica, one of the key philosophies behind modern democracy. Many other intellectuals, such as Voltaire, Diderot and Rousseau, spread their thoughts around Europe, putting France on the map as the intellectual heart of Europe, from where the revolution in learning started, for a big part because of the 72,000 article Encyclopedia by Diderot. These ideas about people ruling the country became very popular among the people, who saw the King and Queen of France taxing the people heavily after the financial crisis the country had gotten after the several unrewarding wars they had fought. The unhappiness grew and grew until Paris had seen so many riots that it was basically in total anarchy. The King and Queen had to flee the city. The unhappy citizens of Paris now had the chance to start a revolution. On the 14th of July 1789, angry people stormed the Bastille fortress to capture the weapons and ammunition located inside the building. They ended up freeing the prisoners and killing